next session is a panel discussion. And in this panel discussion, we are engaging with some folks who have either had some journey in systems change work or is beginning on systems change work in some form or fashion. And so in this panel, it's entitled Changing the System to Improve STEM Persistence. And we'll hear the perspectives of different folks who've been engaged in some systems change work along the way. So first we have with us Andrea Venezia, who is with SRI International, which is also the organization that is our backbone organization. And Andrea has done a lot of systems change work in her various roles, but she is now also the director of the National Includes Network. So First Two Network is part of a group of alliances that are all coordinated under a hub, and Andrea is leading that for us. So I hope, Andrea, you will put the Includes Network URL in the chat for folks to check that out. We also have Evan Widders with us, who is the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education at WVU, and you might have seen his picture in the news of late because he is launching a large institution-wide first-gen effort. And so I'm really happy that you could join us today. Joanna Burt-Kinderman is on the panel as well. And Joanna wears many hats, but they are all connected by less than a degree of separation, I think. She is a district math coach for Pocahontas County Schools and is the project lead for a statewide effort called the Mountaineer Mathematics Master Teachers to improve mathematics education at the K-12 level. She's a statewide math instruction improvement community lead, and she's also the student agency lead for us, the First Two Network. But all of these roles have at least some connection with the others. We also have Gabrielle Chapman with us today, and she is a social justice analyst with the Woodrow Consulting Firm, and really happy to have you here to give your perspective. So if everybody has seen the faces of our panelists, that is awesome. And thank you so much for joining us. So as the moderator for this session, of course, we came up with some questions. And I would like to start out by letting you give more of a bit of an introduction to yourself with a real focus on systems change work. So if you don't mind, please tell us about how you've been involved in changing a system or organization to improve the experiences and outcomes of underrepresented populations, and just sort of tell us where you're coming from on this panel. So Andrea, do you want to go first?
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks again for inviting me today. So I am a researcher at SRI International, and I wear a few hats. And so one of the hats that I play, as you just mentioned, or that I inhabit, is that I'm co-principal investigator or co-lead with the NSF Includes initiative. And I direct the coordination hub, and this is a new role for me. So the vision of NSF Includes is to, and I'm just giving the direct vision from NSF, is to catalyze the STEM enterprise to work collaboratively for inclusive change, resulting in a STEM workforce that reflects the population of the nation. So the coordination hub is an infrastructure within that supports people and organizations who are in the national network by sharing resources like promising practices, building community, connecting people to each other, hosting and facilitating events where people can learn from each other, and so forth. So prior to joining NSF Includes this summer, I was a professor in the California State University system, and I co-created two statewide initiatives, a fellowship program for the state of California that's focused on identifying structural barriers in policy and practice that create inequitable conditions, inequitable opportunities for marginalized students in K-12 and in higher education and a second network within the California State University system that's focused on supporting more equitable learning, engagement, progression, and completion with and for students that requires identifying systemic barriers and ways to remove them or lessen their impact. And so those are the frames. I'll be toggling back and forth as I talk with these different frames that I have, with the NSF includes one being the most recent. I'll stop there.
Thank you. On my list, I have Evan next. So Evan, do you want to just tell us a little bit more about you and how you come to this panel?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love what you guys are doing with the First Two Network, and I really am invested in all of our work with. We have a First Gen office, and as you mentioned, we just started working with First Scholars. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on campus. And thanks, Andrea. I appreciate what you said as well, especially the part about structural barriers, which is one of the things that I think that, we have to work on before anything else is removing barriers to timely progression for first-gen students. There are so many barriers that it can be complicated to figure out which one to attack first, but they're there, and they've been there so long, I think half the time we don't even see them. So I appreciate it. Plus, I'm a native Californian, so I appreciated that as well. Anyway, yeah, so I'm in the provost office, and basically my job is to oversee undergraduate education. And sort of as that office has evolved over the last 2, 3, 4 years, it's become more focused on student success, to the point where I would say that's my primary role, is in attempting to really improve our outcomes, mostly measurable outcomes, in things like graduation rates and retention rates, and course progression and majors. So I really work in that type of field quite a bit. And just to give you an example, since the question asked for sort of an experience and an outcome, one of the things that we did right when I started was to fund a survey called the STAY survey, where we looked at students who were seniors who had considered leaving the institution at some point, and some of which who had actually left the institution and then returned. And we looked at a number of populations, but 2 of those were Pell recipients and minority students. And we asked them what had been the major barriers to graduation, which is sort of a little different than ways we've constructed surveys before, but we found out some really interesting things. And 2 of those were that for our students, one, they sure worked a lot more than we had thought they worked. Most of our Pell recipients on average were working over 30 hours, oftentimes with an on-campus and an off-campus job. Similar types of numbers with minority students frequently. And they had asked us to look at course scheduling, or said that that was a major obstacle, that the way we were allowing them to schedule courses was not facilitating their ability to both work and be productive academically. So as part of a 2.5 year process, we've been going through course scheduling, making sure that all the courses are now on the grid, locked to the grid, so they don't conflict with each other, trying to ensure regularity of when courses are offered, so you don't have that nasty surprise that the course you need to graduate is not going to be offered for another 18 months or something like that. And also offering greater opportunity to take online and hybrid classes when students feel like it will be helpful to them, not to go all online, but to mix those in with on-campus opportunities to allow them to really be more productive in how they can work and be academically productive at the same time. So, the outcome of this was we found that students claim, again, in our surveys, that they're able to put together much more productive schedules, that it's easier for them to work and succeed academically. There's still work for us to do, but I think it's been a good start, and an example of where you can take a single data point and then adjust and help a lot of students, and not just these audiences, but really all of our students, to be able to proceed through the curriculum more easily and get the outcomes we want.
Thank you so much. Joanna?
Thanks. Well, I just want to echo a few things said here. My name is Joanna, and I hold 3 hats professionally. One as a district math coach. I'm just had my decade anniversary, which is wild. So I've been working in Pocahontas County, which is where I grew up. I'm a native West Virginian who left and came back to do this work. Teacher, math teacher by training, and I'm really interested in how to improve educational systems. And this is one of them. So I wear a hat here on the leadership team for the First Two Network, and I serve as a student agency lead. So when we use the phrase not to, not for, but with, one of my jobs is to hold us accountable to that statement. How are we actually doing this work with students? Not to them, not for them. How is our professional development sort of approach embedded in working together with students? And how are we asking for a system to change by first being that change in that system? So I hold that hat, and I also hold the hat of working with Mountaineer Mathematics Master Teachers, which is the latest incarnation of work that I started a decade ago, which really was centered on flipping the narrative about what does it look like to make teaching better. So we know the single biggest predictor of student outcomes is parent income. I don't have a wand to wave there in West Virginia. But shortly after that, down that list just a little bit, but still at the top of it is teacher efficacy. And there's a lot we can do there. And we have to acknowledge that what's been done so far hasn't worked as well as we'd liked it to, and that we all have a role in that. So I really started this project focusing on what bugs teachers. And I just want to give a shout out to Evan there, because he said there are so many barriers that it can get confusing what to attack first. And the nature of this project is that we follow appetite, because there are so many things that we could do to make teaching and learning better in our math classrooms that we're going to focus on the one we're the hungriest for, and not necessarily order them by anyone's external standards. So we're messing with that script a little bit, and we're following some of those same philosophies in the First Two Network. I really want to also uplift that in the First Two Network, systemically, we're thinking about learning and earning all the time. So Evan hit the nail on the head of everything we're learning from both our research and our students, that it's really, really hard for students to succeed with such a big fiscal overhead. And when we can figure out work that needs doing on our campuses and ways in which our students, you heard Jasmine and Keaton, you heard those outcomes, they are more efficacious with underclassmen than professors are for getting the right advice and getting the right feedback initially on campus. They also cost a lot less than staff people on your campuses. So interesting shifts like that are my jam. I'm so grateful to be here, and grateful to First Two Network for inviting me in my other project hat. So thank you so much, Sue-Ann.
Hey, and I want to hear from Gabrielle too.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabrielle Chapman. I am a native of West Virginia. I was born and raised in Charleston, West Virginia. Thank you for inviting me. This topic is near and dear. I'm an underrepresented person. Actually, I have a biology degree. That's actually my educational background. But I grew up, I had a teenage mother in West Virginia, so I have this lived experience to share. A little bit about my background. I moved back to West Virginia when I was 24, and I was hired to start a racial equity nonprofit. It was statewide. It's a coalition. And essentially we were working with grassroots organizing all the way to state level policy change that really centered Black and Brown people and figuring out ways to move Black and Brown people forward in West Virginia. A little bit more about me. I started a consulting firm not too long ago. A few clients have been like the Highlander Research and Education Center. I've been working with the Family Foundation out of California. It's actually like animal welfare work. And I also work with the West Virginia Community Development Hub. I think there's a lot more to share, but I don't want to take up too much time. I think we can get more into it as we go.
I was muted. Thank you all for not telling me I was muted, but I was. I'm going to keep it on you, Gabrielle, if that's okay, for the next question, because I just want us to dig a little deeper for those that have something else to add about how, systems change work differs from other, projects or interventions that we might do aimed at making a difference. So what does systems change mean to you in your work?
So systems change to me has been, it's been the actual concept of system change has been peripheral in a lot of the work. A lot of the times I've approached the work from an equity standpoint or inequity or injustice. But what it really kind of means to me is looking at structural systemic change. And from my perspective, particularly from West Virginia, what we really need to be addressing is economic injustice that everyone is dealing with across the state of West Virginia. And not only that, but root causes as to why folks have a hard time even graduating high school. And if they graduate high school, going to college, being culture shock. And I can tell you from lived experience, I went to the University of Kentucky, a completely different world, and being underprepared for that world. And it really boils down to us coming out of West Virginia, being on an uneven playing field to start. So systems change for me has been really looking at those root causes.
Thank you. Who wants to jump on that and add in your perspective? Andrea?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks. I completely agree with what you just said. I think our systems are really the key to opening up opportunities or closing them down. Otherwise, we're tinkering around the edges and finding workarounds, but keeping the systems anchored in place that are broken for so many students. And I think our systems are expert at workarounds. So when I think of systems change, I think conceptually of identifying and changing practices and policies, power dynamics, relationships, mindsets, and really being action-oriented to change the conditions that harm minoritized and marginalized students and depending on the system, other people participating in the systems. And to give a specific example, I spent years doing research on how assessment and placement in higher education creates inequities in access to critically important gatekeeping classes, and really using student voices a lot in that research to elevate voices and demonstrate to policymakers in California and nationally about the harm that those practices were causing, and then worked with faculty who radically changed developmental or remedial education to provide credit-bearing college-level work instead of non-credit-bearing non-college-level work, which is helping students save time and money. And then there's the huge psychological toll of being in traditional developmental or remedial courses. And worked as an advisor on projects to understand the impact of that work, and then co-created this fellowship program where this sort of magic happened, where people sitting in different positions of policy and practice, K-12 and higher ed, came together outside of the program based on what they learned in the program and drafted legislation together to use multiple measures for assessment and placement in the California community colleges, which is now, it's called AB 705. And that's the rule of law. And so we went from practice-based change to policy-based change to alleviate the strain on people having to do a series of one-offs, a series of workarounds, a series of trying to get people to agreement. Policy came in, made that shift, and now implementation is happening to remove those gatekeeper processes of assessment and placement. And so for me, that was a highlight example of working for about 10 years on that particular barrier.
Wow, thank you for that. I love that example that you just gave us. Who else amongst our panel wants to add in anything on this particular question before we move to the next? Joanna?
Yeah, I'd love to. Oh, sorry, Ellen. I'd love to jump on just briefly in that I'm fascinated with two things. I'd like to highlight something Andrea just said there. She said 10 years. I just want to call that out again. One more time for the folks in the back who are sleepy, 10 years. So I will say that from my end, I think I'm making greater traction in this teacher leadership network, which really is redefining what a role a practicing teacher can take within their district. Right now in West Virginia, you can be a teacher, you can be an instructional coach, you can be an administrator, and there the twain shall meet, right? So as soon as you start doing one other thing, except if one district makes a halfway job, in which case half of your day is segmented in those two spaces. Who are the folks that maybe would have a lot of promise helping each other turn into better teachers, right? Folks who figured out that puzzle themselves. And so in my work, it's been really interesting to really get different players invested in first understanding the problem in the same way, and kind of acknowledging that it's not their fault, but it is their responsibility. And we're dancing with policy. So policy right now is going to require a new funding source that's not a National Science Foundation NOIS award. Super glad to be part of bringing that to West Virginia. Grateful for WVU's partnership there in understanding that a practitioner can be a developer. You don't need a PhD for that. I'm going to give a little shout out there. So I really appreciate WVU, Gay Stewart's leadership there as well. And Matt Campbell, my partner in this project. But I do think that dance is long, and it's the opposite of what we're hungry for. So we want to see really efficient change, and efficient change are always workarounds. They're always one-offs, and that person always goes. I'm bored of that in my mid-40s, 10 years into this project, and I'm really thinking about what does it take to shift a system. An end game can be policy in some cases. In K-12 land, it's got to be practice too. It's got to be a cultural shift. So I just want to give a nod to Andrea and say you're resonating deeply with me, and I hope to continue to learn from you. I'm glad that you're in the role you're in now, so I can stalk you easier.
Evan.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That's all really good stuff. Yeah, the pace of university change is glacial for sure. And I think, there's so many entrenched interests. There's people who like to teach. Just to refer to my previous example with scheduling, you think, oh, that makes a lot of sense, really efficient. Of course, everybody wants that. No, people like to teach when they want to teach. They like to teach on Tuesday, Thursday. They like to teach at certain times. They have favorite rooms. They have audio visual equipment that they like to have, but maybe don't use very efficiently. So there's all these entrenched interests, and to negotiate all those things out could literally take forever. And I think that one thing this pandemic has shown us is that we can change faster than that when we have to. I think for us, it's been just as awful as it's been in so many ways, an opportunity to really switch our way of looking at things to a more data-driven approach, where if we can get the sides to agree that the information we have is basically non-biased and accurate and transparent, then we can get buy-in for what's best for the institution rather than what's best for the individual. And I think most people have come to the realization that what's best for the institution is what's best for the student. And I don't know that was always there. I mean, again, it seems so obvious, but I would say it wasn't always a priority. Efficient functioning, keeping the people happy, treating students in the way we had always treated students, because that's what happened when we went to school. All those sort of entrenched interests are very much alive. And when you talk about a system change, I think we have to get to a place where we can all agree on what constitutes good data. We can disaggregate that data so that we can look at different populations and see where their pain points are. And then we can act on it without having to fight long turf wars that are ultimately extremely difficult, energy sapping, and unfruitful. So great question and great comments from everyone.
Evan, you segued very well into the next question. So I'm just going to leave it with you, if you don't mind, and that is to describe a challenge that you've encountered or are worried about if you're embarking on a new systems change effort, and your ideas for addressing that challenge.
Yeah, so there's so many challenges. The pandemic's been a real challenge for our students economically, emotionally, from a mental health viewpoint. I would say, the biggest challenge we maybe have that we haven't really been able to find the boundaries of yet is the current sort of mental health issues our students are suffering. In many ways, it seems like a place where you can put all the resources you have forever. And these sort of numbers in terms of students who are seeking mental health relief in some shape and form are growing so fast that the institution, no matter how wealthy you are, it just becomes a difficult thing to be able to do. As much as you want to help, we have to find other ways other than serving, as a full-time counseling center for these students. I hope that doesn't make me sound unsympathetic, because that's the last thing I am. But from a resource perspective, it's simply hard to keep up with demand. And I'm not sure if anyone else on the panel has seen, the light at the end of the tunnel yet, where this is going, how we can support our students in a way that keeps them on track, that makes them happy, that allows them to form the kind of personal connections they need to thrive socially without having everyone need professional help. It's a disheartening situation, I think, from both the students and in our perspective. I'm not sure where we go from here on that one.
Right. Gabrielle, what challenge have you noticed in your work on systemic equity and inequity, and how have you addressed or ideas for addressing that challenge?
It is a large question.
Just pick one.
I know. So I think a couple things. One being there aren't enough models of opportunity or models of what it might look like to be in a certain profession or a field. And a personal example is growing up in West Virginia, I never had a Black professor or Black teacher until I was in college. And never met a Black doctor or nurse or anything, really. One of the things being in West Virginia, I think I can generalize this across the state, there's not really a middle class for Black people. So it wasn't until I went to college did I recognize, I could be a doctor, or, I could go to nursing school. I had no idea about those possibilities. So I want to say that piece. And then also to Evan's point, really thinking from a public health perspective, when we think about social determinants of health, and it could be looking at economic instability or disinvestment in certain neighborhoods or environments, who has access to early childhood education or birth to 3, what is it, like the number of vocabulary words you have by 3 years old is like majorly indicative of where you will end up. So thinking just that about that, and then also thinking about like access to food security. If someone isn't able to figure out or know where they're going to eat, how are you going to focus after school? Those types of things. And I think also, so I think the national stat is 12% of children are in poverty, but like, just to give an example, Black children in West Virginia, the last stat I read was 42% of Black children were in poverty. So, I mean, the biggest issue to me is we kind of have these downstream Band-Aid solutions to like very upstream problems. And until we really dig into like how to, and really at our state level, dig into how to fix those root causes, we're never really going to get to the place we're trying to go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So I think part of your overcoming or solution idea is to get people together to really address these root causes, right? Gabrielle, that's got to be first as the Band-Aids are being applied, we have to do this as well. Joanna, do you have anything to add right here to this particular conversation?
You know me, Sue Ann. I always have something to add. I want to braid a little bit on what Gabrielle just said that just hits me in the most profound way. And I don't understand that from my own lens, obviously, as a white person walking through the world. But I definitely feel Like when I'm invited to these opportunities, I'm speaking on behalf of our first two students who are, without a fault, underrepresented or first gen, and are outsiders in the systems that they are operating in. And I just want to give an uplift to moments. I'm not going to name the right dean. Maybe Gay can help me out here, but there was a moment early in this pandemic at WVU. There was a moment today at UC. There was a moment with Fairmont's president where those folks are pausing all the stuff they need to do and listening to the folks closest to the problem. So while I'm going to say amen to Gabrielle, that leaves me paralyzed in my moment for now with, a system of folks that don't have those same agendas making our rules for our state, our fiscal rules right now. Do we need to work on all that? Absolutely. Am I going to shy away from that? No. But right now, in the position that I'm in, I'm interested in creating hunger and urgency to start tinkering. And I think we can get in a place where we can get really paralyzed. At the same time that I absolutely agree with what Gabrielle said, the more that people listen to the folks closest to the problem, take on one thing that problem asks of them, not someone else, and come back and talk about it again, the more we can start making strides. So our WVU student leaders called out through invitation of a dean at WVU for our first gen undergrads to tell them what's wrong right now with how we're responding to the pandemic. And WVU, which is an enormous institution, was immediately responsive to a few of those things systemically. UC is asking our first two club, and I want to uplift Jasmine. I'm sharing her news. I heard all the bings. Part of the bings you guys are hearing our student leaders talking about a few things right now on all of our Slack channels. But UC invited the first two to give them guidance on how to celebrate an entire first gen week, the week of November 8th at UC. And what can they do? And what are they doing? They're not sitting in their offices as adults. They're asking the students who've already been successful. And so I want to uplift both of those things that with enormous challenge can come some both frozenness and some finger pointing. And I think it's really, really cool when we do some of the simplest things, which is we want to do something, bring those people most affected by the problem right in the seat next to you and do it together.
Andrea?
Sure, it's hard to add after all this wisdom, so I'll just try to add a few things and be brief. So in terms of a challenge or a problem, I think one of the biggest is there's always someone who's going to try and take down your idea, the need for systems change, and that will likely be someone who has power and who's in the establishment. And so back to the chat earlier, find your people and make your strategy collectively. And then when you make that strategy collectively, it's really complex. And I'll say, I think I'm working in my 5th network now, and you need a lot of allies. And then it's just so messy, right? And so I think one thing is being really clear about what you're doing and what you're not doing and why you're doing it and the actions everyone's taking. And I think being really clear about what does equity mean in the work you're doing? Who are you doing this with? What does systems change mean in your context? How do you define it? What's a system? What's a change? What are you trying to do and see? And how do you know when you see it? And how do you measure your progress? I think all of these terms can mean something very specific and clear, or it can be very watered down and unclear and like the jargon of the day. And so I think making sure that what you're doing is clear for all parties engaged and you're working towards the same goals, and that everything is very clear to everyone. And everyone has the same understandings working in concert together is really important.
All right, panel, that was good stuff right back there. That was awesome. So glad we've recorded this because I'll be listening to it some more. So our next question is to, and maybe somewhat already been answered, but 3 or more main ingredients needed to be successful in systems change. So who wants to name a good ingredient first?
I think first and foremost, we need to listen to each other, and we should never assume. I think one of the things that I've gleaned from this conversation that inspires me is that everyone identifies that they're not the expert, especially when it comes to marginalized individuals or to first-gen students, unless they have been a marginalized or a first-gen student. I think all too often we empathize, and that's what we do as educators, but we create our own world based on our experiences, not having walked in someone else's shoes. And so I think it's critical that before we go out and solve a problem, we ask the individual, we listen to what the problem is, and then we go forward.
Thank you, Myrta. That was awesome. Joanna?
Yeah, I'm bad at this right now. I've been called out on this by my teacher network, and I do like to brag on this crew. It's now 35 fellows strong, each serving a 5-year term, each intending to recruit 2 to 4 teachers in their home district. So within a year, we're going to be about 100 teachers strong, secondary and middle math teachers, affecting around 5,000 students in our state. So our opportunity is enormous. We're super grateful to your buddies, Andrea at Noyce, at NSF, for believing in this project in West Virginia, and of course my partners at WVU. But my teacher leaders called me out on this because I say it often. Crucial to improvement is celebration. And man, when you dig into these problems, is it depressing? It is, man. You spend too much time even in any one of these things, and your mind will boggle with how hard this set of barriers are. So we've got to make that space to listen to that math prep course. Yes, it was 11 students. It was 11 students. And they did something really cool that had 100% of students say, this was a good use of time. 100% of faculty say, hey, I don't get a chance to talk between math and chemistry. What? We got to make a big deal about that. I hope institutionally, all those institutions will brag on those folks that took part on that soon. I hope I call myself out more to say, go UC, go Jasmine for making that shift. And just really pay attention to the role of celebration in this kind of work, because burnout's strong and it's really easy to fall back on those words, as Andrea called out, as Gabrielle said, we can use these words, we can use the right words, and we can do nothing, right? So making sure that we're celebrating those moments is just super important.
Yay, love that. Who else would like to add to this question? Main ingredient needed to be successful in systems change. Andrea?
I can chime in too. A few of the things that I think a lot about, and this is really specific to West Virginia, is how we need to shift to a trauma-informed perspective. And that can be in the college classroom, but I really think of it from the perspectives of children coming through foster care, children facing, various things going on at home. Another thing I think we should consider are popular education models. So basically coming from a framework that sort of similar to what someone had just said, but people closest to the problem are proximate leaders and understand their issues that they're encountering on a daily basis. One example of popular education, how it's really kind of come to the forefront, is within community schools and high schools. There are a lot of good examples, like out of New York, where they bring in parents to be a part of a community learning together. It also could look like participatory action research that actually includes community within the research. So they have some ownership over that research rather than being the subject or like this, thing. And then the last thing is just investment and investing in people closest to the problem and using that equity lens. And I always say equity is literally just giving people who have had the least the most. So those are the 3 things that come to mind.
Awesome. Andrea?
That is hard to follow because that +1 for everything you said. So I think, I wish there was like the special sauce or special list of ingredients that we could just all use, right? And I think at base, the work isn't technical, it's relational, it's political. And so having those relationships and strategies and a clear sense of purpose and problem definition, lots of energy. I do find, as it seems like there's a theme here too, that you find your people, you create the energy in the room and you make this a fun thing to do too. It's hard. It's really hard. It's also can be joyous, and holding that sort of spirit in the room is so important. I think having a clear sense of the roles and responsibilities for people inside a system and people outside a system, and how you work together in different ways, and being clear about different kinds of policy. I'll say like big P, little p, like state system policy, institutional policy, district policy, departmental, classroom, those all come into play. And also really reiterating the trauma-informed work and assets-based frames are so important, moving away, I think, from conceptions of merit and rigor that have been so harmful for students for forever, and distributed leadership, and really involving people who are affected by changes, and being thoughtful and intentional about that leadership, and not tokenizing involvement, really making sure you're giving power, creating power together, creating new tables, creating new agendas, and other people are doing that work, not the folks who've been traditionally doing that work.
Yes, thank you for that. And, I'm celebrating our new co-chairs and new leaders today and this afternoon, because man, they've blown my socks off with the work they're doing, and how articulate they are in describing it. So I love that so much. This next question is going to narrow us in focus a little bit to first generation and underrepresented students and their success in college. And in this question, we were interested in knowing, sort of what the less visible parts of the system are in higher education, let's say, that make it difficult for first gen and underrepresented students to succeed in college, and particularly as a STEM student. And how would we address those parts of the system? Andrea, do you want to go first? I see you nodding. You're still on my main screen, so I'll let you go first this time.
Sure. I mean, when I was a professor, I often felt like we were in the DMV. Like, it's like, fill out this form, stand in this line. You can't take this class this year. You can't take this lab with your science class because it's too full. So we're disconnecting those things, and go to the bursar's office. And then students would say, what on earth is the bursar's office, and why should it wait there? And how do I manage like waiting in line at the bursar's office with my job and my family? And it's, I think so much is just like ensuring that we're not having students be widgets in our machines, and really demystifying processes and language. And so I think about navigating majors, figuring out which courses to take when, navigating financial aid, knowing about adding and dropping classes, fighting things, actually hopefully eliminating things like academic probation, dealing with the gatekeeping courses if we're not eliminating them, which I hope we are, and the related assessments, figuring out who's best equipped to advise, given your unique context and aspirations. I think all those things are really hidden. And I think there's a key role in supporting faculty in understanding their role in those conversations and providing training for faculty to do that, because staff holds so much of that space, and our student affairs staff members are so keenly aware of that's what they get trained to do. I don't think speaking as a former faculty member, that's not what faculty are usually trained to do. And I think the classroom is where a lot of harm is caused. So we often compartmentalize roles, and need to use really accessible language for things so that students know we're calling an apple and not something that's a very weird word for an apple, like using a word like bursar's office all the time, just calling things what they are so they're really accessible.
Amen to that. I still don't know exactly what bursar means. Evan, would you like to jump in on that? That seems like a good place for you to hop in.
Yeah, that was great, Andrea. I don't know if I can get a list like that, but I did make my own list too. I think I have a lot of the same things. I love the bursar's office. I'm a historian by trade, so I have that tendency to love these old antiquated titles like provost, which my wife still doesn't understand what that is. And I can't really explain it. Why is it called that and not a CFO or something equally, I don't know, at least typical. But, higher ed can be an odd place, but I agree with you. I mean, jargon is a problem. I think the massive amount of holds that students are faced with on their accounts all the time, these are just sort of granular things, complexities of aid and finance, having to know the next step all the time, instilling confidence in first gen students. It's almost like, they've arrived at a foreign country without a dictionary, and we just expect them to figure it out, which I think is profoundly harmful. We need to find ways to get them involved in the community, in activities. We hear from students, the number one reason why people leave WVU, and Gay and Lori may shrug their eyes because they've heard this from me a million times, is not academics, it's fit. They don't feel connected there. And that's what our surveys tell you is the number one reason. Now, it's usually wrapped up in other things as well. The number two reason is finance, and the number three reason is academics. And although they're all connected, I think that we have to find a way to get at this fit problem and make people feel comfortable in their own skin on our campus. There's that imposter syndrome we've all heard about. I think it's very real. Even for students who aren't first gen, this feeling that you're in a place where you don't really belong and everyone's smarter than you and they know where they're going to be in 4 years and you don't. There's a pull of family ties, of place, of being somewhere new, for people who maybe haven't had a lot of chance to ever be in a new place. We find that many of our students have economic obligations to home, and they're taking their aid and they're sending it back home, or at least some of it, which makes things difficult. I think one of the things we tend to overlook is how much books and technology costs every semester. If you're making $10 an hour and we're asking you to buy a $280 textbook, that's 2 weeks of work after taxes to buy a textbook. Well, where are you going to eat for the rest of that 2 weeks? So these are all very really real problems that as Gabrielle has mentioned, really privilege a certain class of people at the institution. And we can't just cut people a check and expect those problems to be solved. We have to look at them, explore other options, and then open up, I think, more communication. It's difficult to reach out to every student when their problems are so individualized, but we can do better. We have to do better at these things, I think, to really get where we want to be as an institution.
You're muted, Sue Ann.
I know I'm muted. I would like to turn the floor over to Joanna and then Gabrielle for just any final thoughts you want to give. It doesn't have to be related to this last question if you don't want it to be.
I want to do both because I am here, with my teacher network hat, but I'm also here as the person who coordinates. So every campus, we have 6 campuses, now 7, yay. It's really exciting to have a community college on board. But every campus has a couple of student directors that are funded at a higher rate than our student scholars. And those directors can use their funding not only for research and to help improve themselves, but to be helping their institution improve and helping those students behind them improve. And so I just want to call out, just in the nature of thinking about celebration and carrots, right now, it's really important to identify problems and also to identify carrots. So I don't think across these institutions, and I'm not a higher ed person, I'm watching through the lens of faculty and through students. We're doing a better job, at least inside this network, looking through the lens of students. We need to do it a lot more. I don't know that we're doing a better job looking through the lens of people who teach first year, first semester courses. And so I'm going to call that out as I don't know that we've really listened carefully to those people. They're usually not the people that are, sitting next to you, Evan, it seems like, right? Some of those people are adjuncts. And so what are the carrots for those people to change their behaviors in those courses in the very beginning? And what are the things that we're willing to do before students step on campus? So I want to call out those 2 things as just incredibly critical, and just tell you one story. I work in the most rural county east of the Mississippi. We've got some great math students here. We have math teachers who stay. So we have a piece of the puzzle solved. Or we're working on solving it anyway. We're making tracks, but we have seniors who love robotics. We have really cool robotics programming, computer science, thanks to some work with Gay there too, and some great calculus students. And they don't know what they want to major in, so they're just not applying to college. Because how on earth are they supposed to declare a degree that they have to do before they step on campus? And I'm not informed enough yet, I will be soon, to help them understand which major do you pick so most doors are open after first semester when you know more. So it's just one example of when you're working with people really far from those institutions, something we might want to think about as relatively low-hanging fruit, along with what we can do to really celebrate those faculty in their career enhancements. So what a blessing to be in a conversation with these three folks. And I wish we weren't limited, and I wish we were in the same room and could have a cocktail afterwards.
Absolutely.
Next time.
All right, Gabrielle, I'm going to give you the last word on this panel.
I just I was listening to everyone else in terms of things that are less visible. Just piggybacking off of everyone else. This is really my own personal reflection of college. So I dropped out of college twice. It took me 6 years to get through. So that's the story. And parts of it are dealing with sense of belonging, thinking you belong in a department that is an engineering department of all white men, or maybe it looks like elitism or microaggressions that may or may not happen in a class because of whatever reason, or it may be accessibility or undiagnosed mental illness. It may be non-traditional students that have kids but don't have access to daycare or childcare. And I think Evan mentioned this, but also caretakers of family. So I think there are a lot of things that are less visible, but I think it's important for us as individuals and collectively to think about going back to the trauma-informed care, but also just being vulnerable and being able to be vulnerable with each other about what we're dealing with and experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. I too wish that this panel were in person and we were getting ready to go to the bar and have a little drink, keep this conversation going. I learned so much, and so grateful to have this recorded as well, because these are actionable things that have come out in this panel today, and I appreciate your perspectives.